Snow fell like a curse, each flake a silent lash against Hannah Harper's wind-roughened face. Hannah was tied near a snow-covered small hut, where her hands were hanging beneath the hut's roof, and she was struggling for her freedom, but the snow all around was giving her more distance. 2 nights of hunger, cold, and betrayal had stripped her hope bare. But a shadow stirred in the pines, a rider, cloaked in dark furs, his eyes hidden in the dusk. Was he her savior, or her doom? Her thoughts were a gray haze, merging with the frost-covered forest, its pines looming like judges. Her face, once bright with the quiet hope of a small-town girl from Ohio, was now ashen, dulled by frost and cruelty. Gideon Holt's voice clawed at her memory. Too plain for a bride, he'd spat, his pale eyes glinting with malice as the townsfolk jeered. No man in the West wants a quiet little seamstress like you. His words cut deeper than the wagon's whip-crack laugh as it rolled away, leaving her to die in the snow. She hadn't screamed, just nodded. The same quiet nod she'd given her father when she boarded the train, clutching Gideon's letter promising a ranch, a new life, a heart scrawled beside his name like a vow etched in blood. Time dissolved. Day and night were just shadows crawling across the pines, their branches heavy with snow. Her wedding dress, once white with dreams, was torn, stained like old bones, its hem caked with mud and ice. One shoe was lost in a snowdrift, the other split open, useless against the frost that bit her toes, now numb and distant. Her lips cracked, each breath a blade in her chest. Her fingers, trembling and blue, could barely curl. Her stomach growled, a weak, forgotten sound. But she wasn't dead. Not yet. Her mother's voice whispered through the cold. Your hands are for healing, Hannah. You mend what's broken, child. She'd believed it, stitching dresses in a cramped room above a seamstress shop, her deft fingers working needle and thread, crafting beauty for others, but never herself. Her nanny's voice joined in, softer, older. You carry my book, my heart. Heal the world. No one called her beautiful. The trees stood as silent sentinels, their bark scarred by cruelties older than hers, watching without judgment, their roots deep in the earth's secrets. A rustle in the woods snapped her awake. Her heart pounded, weak but fierce, a spark in the dark. Wolves? Bandits? Or Gideon, back to gloat over her frozen body? Her eyes strained against the snow's glare, her breath shallow, each inhale stinging. A shape emerged, a horse, its breath steaming like a ghost, and a rider, tall and broad, cloaked in dark furs that blended with the dusk. Long braids spilled from his hood, his skin like sun-warmed stone, glowing faintly in the fading light. He moved without sound, like the forest had birthed him, his presence both steady and unsettling. Hannah's throat tightened, her pulse a frantic drum. Friend or foe? She tried to speak, but only a whimper escaped, frail as a dying ember, lost in the wind. He dismounted, his eyes scanning her, not with shock or pity, but a quiet fire, like he'd faced storms and never bowed. He knelt, drawing a bone-handled knife, its blade catching the faint light of a rising moon. Her body tensed, her breath catching. Was this mercy, or a darker intent? Tahoma, he said, his name a single, steady word, like a stone dropped in still water. The cuffs snapped open, pain flooding her limbs like fire through frozen veins. She cried out, collapsing into the snow, her vision blurring. He caught her, his arms strong but gentle, his cloak warm against her shivering frame. But who was he, and why was he here? The forest held its breath, and so did she. She woke to warmth, the scent of pine smoke and boiled meat wrapping around her like a memory of her mother's kitchen, a place of safety long gone. She lay in a tent, wrapped in thick hides, their weight a comfort against her aching bones. Her wrists were bandaged, the raw skin soothed with a sharp-smelling ointment. Her torn dress was gone, replaced with heavy wool, scratchy but warm. Her toes ached, tingling as life returned, swaddled in soft cloth. Her fingers flexed, stiff but alive. A fire crackled nearby, its light dancing on the tent's canvas walls, where feathers and cedar bundles hung, swaying gently. Tahoma sat cross-legged by the fire, turning a carved ladle in a pot, his face half lit by flames. Calm and watchful, his braids falling over one shoulder. She tried to sit up, gritting her teeth against the ache, her body protesting every move. "Why?" she mouthed, her voice a rasp, barely audible, her eyes locking with his. He pointed to the flames. Warmth, life, kindness. Tears fell, thawing a grief she'd carried since Ohio. A grief deepened by Gideon's betrayal, by the townsfolk's laughter, by a world that saw her silence and not her heart. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the tent, but she wasn't alone. Yet questions gnawed at her. What did he see in her that the world had missed? And what dangers lurked beyond this fragile shelter? A faint sound, a twig snapping, came from the woods. Her heart skipped. Tahoma's eyes flicked to the tent's flap, his hand resting on his knife. "Wind," he said, but his voice was taut, his body alert. She clutched the hides, her breath shallow. Was it really just the wind? Days passed in a quiet rhythm, each one a step away from death, a reclaiming of her strength. Tahoma tended her wounds with ointments made from herbs she didn't recognize. Yarrow, sage, something sharp like mint, their scents mingling with the smoke. His hands were gentle but sure, his silence a comfort, like a blanket over her fears. He hummed low tunes as he gathered wood, his voice rough but melodic, like a river over stones, each note carrying a story she couldn't yet read. He cooked stew, its heat sinking into her bones, a comfort she hadn't known since leaving home. The broth was thick with meat and herbs, its salt waking her tongue, its warmth spreading through her chest. Hannah watched him, noting his precision, his calm strength, the way he moved through the camp like he belonged to the earth itself. No taunts about her quiet ways. No sneers like Gideon's, no judgment in his gaze. One morning, as he cleaned her wrists with warm water, the steam rising in soft curls, she whispered, "You don't look at me like they did." He paused, his eyes meeting hers, dark and steady, like deep water. "I see you," he said simply, his voice low, each word deliberate. Her heart stuttered, a warmth blooming in her chest, but doubt lingered. What did that mean? Was it kindness, pity, or something deeper? And why did his eyes keep flicking to the woods, as if he sensed something she couldn't? She began to help, her strength returning like a slow tide. She ground corn between stones, her hands shaky but determined, the rhythm soothing her frayed nerves. She mended a tear in the tent flap, her stitches uneven but holding, each one a small act of defiance against the chains that had bound her. She fetched snow for melting, her boots crunching softly, the cold air sharp in her lungs. One afternoon, she caught her reflection in a water basin, wind-burnt cheeks, eyes with a new glint, not of shame, but of something like strength, like a fire rekindled. Tahoma watched, not with hunger, but reverence, like she was a story he was learning to read, a page he turned with care. "Snow covers tracks," he said one night, his voice low, the fire popping between them, but not truth. She clutched the carved bear he'd given her, its edges worn from her touch, its round form fitting her palm. Truth stayed. But what truth did he see? A shadow moved beyond the tent, too quick to be sure, a flicker in the dark. Her pulse quickened. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tahoma nodded, his hand on his knife, his body still but alert. "We watch," he said, his eyes scanning the night. The fire's light felt too small, the darkness too vast. She lay awake, her fingers tracing the bear, her mind racing. Was it Gideon's men, tracking her? Or something else, something older, tied to the forest's secrets? One evening, she followed him to a ridge, the horizon bleeding purple and gold, the air sharp with pine and the faint tang of thawing earth. Her borrowed cloak hugged her tightly against the chill, its weight grounding her. The world stretched wide below, a sea of trees swaying in the wind, their size ancient and forgiving. "I dreamed of the West," she murmured, her voice still weak but clearer, each word a step toward herself. "Big skies, honest men. A place where my quiet heart wouldn't matter, where I could be enough." Her voice broke, tears pricking her eyes. I thought Gideon saw me. Tahoma knelt, carving a bear from a piece of bark, round, strong, imperfect, its lines rough but sure. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers, warm despite the cold. Strong here, he said, touching his heart. Then hers, his touch light but firm. Her chest tightened, a sob catching in her throat. Was this a promise, a fleeting kindness, or something she couldn't yet name? A distant howl echoed through the trees. Animal or man? She glanced at Tahoma, his hand resting on his knife, his eyes scanning the horizon. Stay close, he said, his voice low, a thread of steel beneath it. The forest felt alive, watching, waiting, its shadows holding secrets. That night, she lay awake, the bear in her hand, her nanny's herbal book under her pillow, its leather cover worn but warm. Hoofbeats sounded faintly, far off, then faded. Her heart raced. Tahoma, she whispered. He was already awake, his knife in hand. Not tonight, he said, but his voice was tight. She nodded, but sleep wouldn't come. Nights brought new layers to their bond, each moment a thread weaving them closer. One evening, a bone flute's mournful melody drew her outside, its notes curling like smoke. Tahoma played by the fire, its light dancing on his face, revealing lines of grief and strength, his braids gleaming in the glow. My wife taught me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, the words heavy with memory. Hannah froze, her breath catching, the air suddenly colder. Where is she? His gaze lifted to the stars, their light cold and distant, like eyes that had seen too much. Gone. Last snow. Fever took her. Naha was light. Her heart ached, not with jealousy, but awe, a reverence for a love that lingered in his voice, in the flute's mournful song. His love for Naha was a sacred weight, yet he helped her, a stranger, a woman the world had cast out. Why? The question hung unanswered, heavy as the silence between them. She sat beside him, the fire's warmth a fragile bridge, its crackle the only voice in the night. I used to sing while sewing, she said softly, her voice trembling, a memory of her mother's kitchen rising unbidden. Sing, he urged, his eyes gentle, a faint smile touching his lips. She laughed, a brittle sound, like glass about to break. I'd scare the trees. But her smile lingered, a spark in the dark, and for a moment, the world felt softer. As he played another note, a twig snapped in the woods, sharp and close. Tahoma stopped, his hand on his knife, eyes scanning the dark, his body coiled like a spring. Wind, he said, but his voice was taut, his gaze fixed on the trees. Hannah's heart raced, her fingers tightening on the bear. Was it really just the wind, or was someone watching, waiting? The flute stayed silent, the night heavier, the stars less kind. A storm came days later, thunder rolling like a stampede, rain drumming the tent like 1,000 hooves. Hannah jolted awake, her heart pounding, the sound dragging her back to the wagon's wheels fading into the snow, to Gideon's laugh, to the chains that bit her wrists. She sat up, breath caught in her throat, half expecting iron to bind her again. Tahoma was there, kneeling beside her bedroll, his presence steady, his eyes calm but alert. I'm okay, she lied, her voice trembling, her hands shaking. He reached for her hand, not pulling, just holding, his fingers warm against her cold skin. Her fingers gripped his, and she cried, not for the storm outside, but for the one she'd carried for years, the one that said she wasn't enough because of her quiet ways, that she'd never be enough. He stayed, silent and strong, until the thunder passed, his thumb brushing her knuckles, a quiet anchor. But as the rain softened, she heard a faint snap in the woods, a branch, or something more. Tahoma's eyes flicked to the tense flap, his hand on his knife, his body tense. Sleep, he said, but his voice was taut, his gaze fixed on the dark. She clutched her nanny's herbal book, its leather cover a comfort, its pages filled with remedies she'd yet to learn, salves for burns, teas for fevers, tonics for aching hearts. What was out there, and would it find them? She lay awake, the book against her chest, the bear in her hand, her mind racing. The storm passed, but the unease lingered, a shadow in the tense corners. Spring crept in, snow melting, earth softening. Hannah grew stronger, grinding corn, stitching tents, fetching snow, and studying her nanny's herbal book filled with healing recipes and gentle wisdom. Listen to their pain, child. She healed, even when they hated her, Hannah told Tahoma. You carry her, he said, voice tender. One evening, as they ate, he froze, eyes on a dust cloud at the horizon. What is it? She asked. Dust, he said, hand on his knife. Maybe Gideon's men. Her stomach tightened. The camp felt exposed. The future, uncertain. The book, her only shield. Their bond deepened, woven through small acts. Her laughter, awkward at first, then full, ringing through the camp like a bell. His carvings, birds and bears left by her bedroll, each one a quiet gift. Her stitches, mending his cloak, her fingers finding joy in the work. His stories, told in halting English about his mother's songs, his wife's love for small things, his tribe's winters in the south, their fires bright against the snow. She learned Comanche words, flame for fire, light for star, haven for home, strength for courage. He spoke more English, soft but open, his accent wrapping each word like a warm shawl. Love bloomed, not a wildfire, but roots, deep and certain, growing in the spaces between their silences. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she caught him watching her, his eyes soft, a faint smile touching his lips. What? She asked, breathless, her heart fluttering. Flame does not judge, he said, his voice low, each word sinking deep. Her heart swelled, the words a balm, a truth she'd never heard. But a distant hoofbeat echoed through the trees, faint but real, a single beat, then silence. She froze, her breath catching. Tahoma, he raised a hand, listening, his eyes scanning the dark, his body still but alert. Not close, he said, but his voice was tight, his hand on his knife. Was it Gideon, come to reclaim her, or something worse? She clutched the herbal book, its pages whispering her nanny's strength, but sleep eluded her, the night heavy with unseen eyes. One morning, Tahoma pointed south, his voice steady, his eyes calm but searching. My people wait. We go soon. Her heart raced, a storm of choices swirling. Go with him to his tribe, a world unknown, or stay in a land that had rejected her. The choice loomed as they packed camp, her hands folding blankets with care, her mind spinning. She found a new page in the herbal book, a recipe for a tonic to ease heartache, her nanny's note in the margin, for those who carry too much. Give them rest. Hannah's eyes stung, her fingers tracing the words. Could she heal her own heart, mend the wounds Gideon's words had left? Tahoma watched her read, his face unreadable, his presence a quiet anchor. You choose, he said, his voice soft but firm. Stay or come. She nodded, but the hoofbeats returned that night, closer, a steady rhythm, then gone. Her fingers tightened on the book, her pulse racing. What if they follow us? She asked, her voice low, fear creeping in. Tahoma's eyes darkened, his hand on his knife. Then we face them, he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. The words steadied her, but the forest felt smaller, the stars less kind, the book's remedies of fragile hope. They spent a day preparing, Tahoma teaching her to shape arrowheads, his hands guiding hers over flint, his touch patient. Stone breaks to become sharp, he said, his voice low, a lesson in the words. She nodded, her first arrowhead crude but hers, a small victory. She showed him the book's recipe for a salve to stop bleeding, mixing yarrow and plantain by the fire, the scent sharp and green. Nanny said this saved my uncle, she said, her voice soft, a memory of her mother's pride rising. Tahoma nodded, his eyes warm. You saved too. Her chest tightened, a spark of purpose igniting. But that night, a fire flickered in the distance, too far to be sure, too close to ignore. Tahoma scouted, returning with a grim face. Men. 3, maybe 4. Not Gideon's. Her heart sank. Who were they, and what did they want? The book felt heavier, its pages a call to courage, But fear lingered, a shadow in her dreams. They came back to Dust Hollow. The sky was light. The air smelled like flowers. Hannah sat tall on her horse. She wore a simple dress. A blue shawl moved in the wind. Tahoma rode next to her. His horse walked with pride. People stopped and stared. Women dropped baskets. Men stood still. Children watched in silence. Gideon stood near the saloon. He held a drink. His coat was dirty. His face was red. "You're back," he said. His voice was weak. She did not answer. She kept writing. He had no power now. At the store, the sign said Harper and Goods. The letters were old. "I want this place," she said. Her voice was clear. The sheriff came forward. He looked tired. "It's yours," he said. "But be careful. Some people have not changed." People whispered. Some were kind. Some were not. Would they accept her or push her away again? Inside the dusty shop, memories lingered, her mother's songs, her nanny's teas, childhood days folding cloth. The shelves were empty, but the space felt alive. Tahoma gave her hand-woven fabric, earth-toned, edged in her blue stitching. "A beginning," he said. She hung a sign, "Healing for All." Her real work began with her grandmother's herbal book, its pages full of remedies and wisdom. "Listen to their pain, child." By firelight, she mixed salves and brews, the air rich with herbs. Slowly, those who once mocked her came seeking help, silent, humbled. A fevered woman wept in relief. A once cruel man muttered thanks. They paid with coins, food, or wool, their shame clear. But with each visit, Hannah wondered, would their respect last or turn bitter again? The shop became a haven, her hands healing where words had wounded, her nanny's book a beacon. She spent mornings grinding herbs, the mortar's rhythm a song, afternoons tending patience, their stories spilling like water, grief, fear, hope. Evenings, she read the book, its pages whispering strength, her nanny's notes a lifeline. "Healing is courage, child. Give it freely." One woman, her face lined with grief, brought a sick child, his cough rattling like dry leaves, his eyes dull. Hannah brewed a feverfew tea, holding the boy's hand as his fever broke, his small chest rising easier, his mother's sobs filling the shop. "I called you names," the mother admitted, voice low, her hands twisting her apron. "I was wrong." Hannah nodded, her throat tight, her eyes soft. "We all learn," she said, her voice steady, a bridge between them. Another day, a farmer with a festering wound limped in, his eyes downcast, his hat crumpled in his hands. "Heard you're a witch," he muttered, then softer. "But my leg's bad." She cleaned the wound, applied a comfort salve, and wrapped it in clean cloth, the air sharp with the salve's green scent. He returned a week later, walking steady, a sack of apples as payment, their skins red and warm. "Didn't think you'd help me," he said, his voice gruff but honest. "Didn't think you'd ask," she replied, a small smile touching her lips. The exchange lingered, a small victory, a crack in the town's prejudice. But the air was uneven. Some faces warmed, others hardened, their whispers sharp as thorns. Tension simmered, a current beneath the town's surface. One night, a rock shattered her window, glass scattering across the floor like broken stars, a note tied to it. "Go back where you came from." Her heart pounded, the words echoing Gideon's taunts, her hands shaking as she read. Tahoma stood beside her, his knife gleaming in the moonlight, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the street. "They fear what they don't know," he said, his voice low but firm, a steel thread beneath it. She clutched the herbal book, its pages a shield, its weight grounding her. The next day, she mixed a salve for a child's rash, the mother's thanks drowning out the hate, her voice warm with gratitude. But at night, she locked the door, listening for footsteps in the dark, the book open on her lap, its remedies a quiet defiance. Sheriff Porter investigated, his face grim, his boots heavy on the shop's floor. "Could be kids," he said, but his hand rested on his gun, his eyes uneasy. "Or could be more. I'll patrol nights." Hannah nodded, but fear coiled tighter, a snake in her chest, its fangs sharp. A stranger began appearing, tall, hat low, lingering outside the shop, his gaze sharp, his shadow long. He was joined by another, then a third, their faces hidden, their whispers low, watching from the saloon's porch. One night, Hannah saw them by the saloon, Their faces half-lit, one holding a rope, its coils glinting in the moonlight. Her heart raced, her hands shaking as she locked the door. "Tahoma," she whispered, her voice trembling. He scouted, finding tracks leading to the hills, his face grim, his knife sharp. "Not Gideon," he said, his voice low. "Others. 5, maybe 6. Her heart sank, the book's weight a fragile shield. Who were they, and what did they want? Her dreams were restless, filled with chains, laughter, hoofbeats, and the glint of a rope. Tahoma built a small cabin at the edge of town, sturdy, warm, with herbs growing neatly by the door. In the evenings, they sat together, her head on his shoulder, flowers in her hands, love growing quietly between them. One day, a stranger arrived, a shy mail-order bride from a small town, trembling and rejected. "They don't want me," she whispered. Hannah comforted her with calming tea, listening as Clara shared her painful story of rejection and shattered hopes. "You're enough," Hannah told her firmly. Clara stayed, learning the herbs, her laughter slowly returning. But at night, Hannah lay awake, holding her book, wondering if she could truly protect Clara from Dust Hollow's cruelty. Clara became her shadow, eager but cautious, her fingers clumsy with mortar and pestle but quick to learn, her eyes bright with purpose. Hannah taught her remedies: nettle for strength, comfort for bruises, elderberry for colds, chamomile for restless nights. "My nanny said healing's in the listening," Hannah told her, showing her how to steep chamomile for a restless child, the steam soft and sweet. Clara nodded, her voice soft. "No one listened to me before." Their bond grew, a quiet sisterhood, their laughter a light in the shop's cedar-scented air. But the town's eyes followed Clara too, their gazes sharp, their whispers cruel. One afternoon, a woman hissed, another one, as Clara swept the shop's porch, her broom pausing mid-stroke. Hannah stepped forward, her voice calm but steel, her eyes locking with the woman's. "She's with me." The woman backed off, her face flushing, but the air felt heavier, the whispers sharper, the town's pulse uneven. Clara's hands shook that night, her eyes downcast. "They'll never want me," she whispered. Hannah knelt, her hand on Clara's shoulder. "They don't decide your worth," she said, her voice firm, echoing Tahoma's fire. Clara nodded, but her smile was frail, a candle in the wind. The shop thrived, its shelves lined with jars of salves, dried herbs, and tinctures, their labels in Hannah's neat hand, the glass catching the light. Townsfolk came daily, a farmer with a cough, his breath ragged, a girl with a sprained ankle, her limp easing under Hannah's care, an elder with aching joints, his hands steadying after her tonic, a mother with a fevered baby, her tears drying as the child slept. Each left lighter, their thanks a balm for old wounds, their stories weaving a tapestry of need and hope. Hannah's hands moved with purpose, her nanny's book open on the counter, its pages worn but alive, its remedies a bridge between her and the town. One man, a blacksmith who'd once laughed at her, brought his son, his arm broken from a fall, his eyes dull with pain. Hannah splinted it, brewed a willow bark tea for the pain, and sent them home with a salve, its scent sharp and green. The blacksmith returned with a new iron latch for her door, its weight solid in her hand. "Didn't think you'd care," he said, his voice gruff but honest, his eyes meeting hers. "Didn't think you'd come," she replied, a small smile touching her lips, a crack in the wall between them. But the threats only grew. One night, Clara spotted a crude symbol carved into the shop door, a clear warning. Hannah's stomach turned, remembering Gideon's sneer and the shattered window. "We tell Porter," Tahoma said, steady and watchful. The sheriff came, uneasy, promising night patrols. Still, fear tightened its grip. The strangers, now 5, lingered near, eyes sharp, whispers low. One night, Hannah saw them near the saloon. One held a rope, moonlight catching its coils. Terrified, she locked the door. Tahoma tracked footprints into the hills. "Not Gideon," he said. "Others. Organized." Her heart sank. Who were they? And what did they want? Her dreams were restless, filled with chains, laughter, hoofbeats, and the glint of a rope. A new face arrived, a widow named Lila, her hair graying, her eyes sharp but kind, her limp eased by a cane. She sought a salve for her knee, but stayed to talk, her voice warm, Her stories rich with travels, rivers crossed, towns left behind, a life carved from loss. "Heard you're a healer," she said, sipping Hannah's chamomile tea, its steam curling in the shop's light. "Town split. Half love you, half don't trust you. Some call you a witch." Hannah nodded, her chest tight, her hands steady on the mortar. "Always been that way," she said, her voice low. Lila leaned closer, her eyes bright. "Keep going. They'll come around. You're stronger than their hate." Lila became a regular, bringing stories, her words a comfort, her presence a shield. But she warned Hannah of rumors. Men at the saloon talking of teaching her a lesson. Their voices low, their plans hidden. Hannah told Tahoma, who scouted the hills, finding a camp. 6 men, armed, their fire small but real. "Not townsfolk," he said, his voice low, his eyes dark. "Outsiders. Trouble." Her heart sank. The book's remedies a quiet defiance. But fear lingered, a shadow in her dreams. A rival healer emerged. Martha, a sharp-eyed woman with a cart of tonics, her voice loud, her remedies cheap but weak. She set up by the church, her words sharp. "No need for that quiet witch," she spat, her eyes glinting, her crowd nodding. Hannah's heart sank, but she kept her door open, her hands steady, her book guiding her. Some townsfolk turned to Martha, drawn by her prices, but others stayed, their trust in Hannah's remedies stronger, their gratitude deeper. One day, Martha's tonic sickened a child, his face pale, his mother frantic. She came to Hannah, tears streaming, her voice breaking. Hannah brewed an elderberry tea, holding the boy's hand, her voice soft, her hands steady. He recovered, his mother weeping thanks, her arms around Hannah. Martha's cart grew quiet, her crowd thinning, but her eyes burned, her whispers sharp. "She'll pay," Martha muttered, her voice low, her gaze fixed on the shop. Hannah's heart raced, but she kept working, the book's pages a call to courage. The town held a meeting, the church packed, voices loud, some for Hannah, some against. Lila spoke, her voice clear, her cane steady. "She heals us," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "You mock her quiet ways, but her hands save your children." Clara stood, her voice shaking but firm. "She gave me a home." The blacksmith nodded, his voice gruff. "She fixed my boy." But others shouted, Martha's allies, the stranger's friends, their words sharp. "She don't belong." Hannah stood, her voice steady, her shawl bright. "I'm here to heal, not fight. Judge my hands, not my heart." The room quieted, some nodding, others glaring. Porter watched, his hand on his gun, his eyes uneasy. The meeting ended, no vote taken, but the air was heavy, the town's heart split. Hannah started a healing circle, inviting women, Clara, Lila, the blacksmith's wife, the fevered boy's mother. They met by the shop's hearth, sharing stories, brewing teas, their laughter soft, their bond strong. Clara bloomed, her hands steady, her smile bright. Lila taught them songs, her voice rich, her cane tapping the rhythm. The circle grew, a light against the town's shadows, but Martha's whispers followed, her allies watching, their eyes sharp. One night, the shop's door was smeared with mud, a note pinned, "Leave or burn." Hannah's heart pounded, but the circle stood with her, their hands cleaning, their voices firm. Tahoma scouted, finding the strangers' camp closer, their fire brighter, their numbers growing. 8 now, armed, their laughter low. "We need help," he said, his voice low, his eyes dark. Hannah nodded, the book open, its pages a call to fight. They rode to Tahoma's tribe, a 3-day journey, the road rough, the air sharp with pine and promise. His people welcomed them, their fires bright, their voices warm, their tents a circle of strength. The elder, Tsani, listened, her eyes sharp, her braids silver. "You heal," she said to Hannah, her voice low, her hand on the book. "We fight." She gave them warriors, for men, their knives sharp, their horses steady. Clara stayed, learning from Tsani, her hands grinding herbs, her heart light. Lila rode back, her cane steady, her stories a shield. The warriors scouted, finding the strangers' camp, their plan clear, burn the shop, drive Hannah out. The warriors struck at dawn, silent, their knives quick, the strangers scattering, their rope left in the dust. Porter arrested 3, their faces grim, their leader gone. The town quieted, the air softer, the whispers fading. On her return's anniversary, Hannah rode through Dust Hollow, Tahoma beside her, Clara and Lila behind, the warriors proud. Her braid was thick, her shawl bright, her deerskin dress a flag. The town gathered, their silence breaking into claps. First a girl, then a mother, then hundreds, their hands a steady rhythm, their eyes warm. Not pity, but pride. The boy waved a flower, his mother nodding. The blacksmith raised his hammer, his son smiling. Hannah smiled, not for them, but for herself. The girl who'd begged for space, now a woman who carved her own. At the tree where she'd been chained, its bark scarred but standing, they buried a seed. Hannah, Tahoma, Clara, Lila, the warriors. Something new, Hannah said, her hand on the trunk, not a victim, but a witness. Tahoma nodded. Always. Clara added, for us all. Lila sang, her voice rich, the warriors humming.